This solo was performed on Gary Numan's 1979 tour. It appears on the remastered version of the Living Ornaments 79 album, and it was performed by Billy Currie on his now famous Arp Odyssey. And here's an article about him from the GForce website. They do a great emulation of the Odyssey called the Oddity. I'll put a link to that in the description, and maybe I'll put their software up against this vintage unit at some point just to show how good it sounds. And of course, you don't need an Odyssey to recreate this. You just need any synth with 2 oscillators and sync, as we'll see in a minute. But it's a bit of a weird track for him to have done this. It was a 1963 hit by the Drifters, and it's got that real sort of Atlantic sound, that sort of really sort of American soul. Here's a little snippet from the instrumental section. That's got a real Burt Bacharach sound to it, that brass in particular. And if you're interested, Phil Spector was on guitar. A little bit of a factoid for you. But the Gary Numan version sounds nothing like that. It's dystopian, it's dark, it's really quite minimal. And if you look up the Wikipedia entry for On Broadway, you'll see the Gary Numan version listed with the synth solo given a special mention, which is really unusual. You normally don't get solos name-checked, which I suppose is an indication of quite how renowned it is, but I haven't come across it until a couple of months ago. I put a picture of this on Instagram when I was coming back or going to get some repairs done, and somebody mentioned, you know, can you rock it like Billy Currie? And someone else mentioned this synth solo in particular, and I was like, who's Billy Currie? And turns out he's a bit of a synth god, so asking who's Billy Currie is a bit like a football fan asking who's Pele. But in my defence, when he was at the height of his fame, I was a child who wasn't aware that people in bands actually had names and their own careers. Amongst other things, he was in Ultravox, he toured with Gary Numan obviously, and was part of the writing team of Visage's Fade to Grey. So he's definitely in the synth hero category, and he's a brilliant musician, and loads of people think this is by far the best synth solo ever recorded. Anyway, that's the history lesson over. Why is this so good? Well, it's got so many different textures and techniques all within 2 minutes, and it's 2 minutes as well. It's not like a middle eighth or an 8-bar loop. This has got time to evolve, and it's not only musical, but it does all those little techniques that I like to do when I'm doing my doorless jams and when I'm recording, and that's taking a patch and exploring that patch and doing different things with it over time. So he's not just doing that, he's also playing it live and bringing out some really musical lines from it. So we start off with something really sort of nice and almost organic, sounds almost like a violin. And then he really dirties it up by making the sync screech like a banshee, flick it down 2 octaves, and mess with the frequency of oscillator 2. And then following that, we bring in this lovely big portamento sweep. So we push the portamento up, flick the octave back to 0, and underneath that, it sounds like there's some modulation happening anyway. And because those 2 oscillators are in sync, that's just slightly changing the tone. And then, of course, we've got the flanger. I'm using the Mogofoga cluster flux for this. He used an EHX, is it Electric Mistress? I think that's what it's called. But it's doing a similar job. Just adds a little bit of sort of electronic-y phasiness or flanginess over the top of what's a really nice sort of gentle lead sound. Let's take that off. And that's close enough, I think, without being too anal about things. You don't need an expensive one. It's just the thing I've got that can do flangy sounds. So we've got the organic-y things. We've got that mix in there of the sort of nice, slow, mellow leads, the big sweeps. And we've also got a bit of a little jazzy riff as well. Is that jazzy, or is it more of a guitar riff? It sounds more like a guitar riff, I think. But actually, this is really good for those jazzy sort of things because it's so experimental. Herbie Hancock's Chameleon is an absolutely outstanding use of this. You should check that out if you haven't. In fact, that could be one of the best synth solos ever. It's too hard for me to play, though, so I won't attempt that one. But yeah, let's break down this sound, shall we? This is a really simple tone. It's got 2 oscillators, both on a sawtooth with the sync turned on and a little bit of LFO. If we look here, we got the 2 oscillators, both on a sawtooth, sync. And there's a little bit of modulation I showed earlier. If I take that off, not too much, because then it sounds like PWM, it sounds too thick. Just adds a nice little bit of movement. I don't know if that's in the original, it's hard to tell on the recording, but it sounds nice anyway. And as you play the solo, you play around with that sync a little bit to bring out little extra harmonics. It sounds a little bit electronic, it sounds, and like a screaming banshee at other times. But it's a really simple thing. We've got a little bit of LFO, as we saw earlier. And that's to make it much more emotive. Without it, it sounds a little bit flat. And then, as we saw before, to get those really screechy things, knock it down 2 octaves, hit the key. And for the sweeps, hit the portamento up, put it back to the normal octave, and play. Yeah, so that's the tone, really simple. There's a tiny little bit of release and there's no attack. Filters on full, take a photo of that. There's not a lot happening there really. This isn't doing anything. Yeah, so really simple. Everything else is down. So if you're not using an Oddity, probably start off with your initial tone, which will be a single sawtooth, add a second sawtooth, add sync, and then just detune it slightly and add a little LFO to the pitch on oscillator 2. That's it. So let's take a look at the actual solo and what he plays. There's a 4-chord progression that plays through it, and it plays through that progression 3 times. So there's 3 main sections, and each of those sections you can sort of break down into the more organic bit and to the electronic-y bit. So we start off. And I should point out, I'm playing this a semitone out. When I'm playing an A sharp, I should be playing an A. But when I was listening to it and working out how I played it, I didn't realise the synth was a semitone out. So yeah, either knock your synths out by a semitone or just transpose what I'm doing here. And then we start going a little bit more electronic. Just knock this out of tune a little bit. And then we hang around on that note, just modulating through those tones a little bit. Until we get to the next chord change and we hit the F, or you'll be hitting an E, and then we knock it down 2 octaves. And we do that 4 times, so slides about 4 times, and I'm singing to myself on Broadway there as I do that. On Broadway, on Broadway. I'll stop embarrassing myself, shall I? And then we move to that big portamento sweep. So while we're doing that, holding the note on, twiddling about, throw that up to there, and then wait. And you have to remember to bring the portamento down once you've hit the top note, otherwise these next 2 notes are going to sound a bit rubbish. And then we come to this nice little clever bit. If you listen to the track, it sounds like a guitar sort of being ravaged or something. It's got this like real crunchy tone. Not quite sure how he does that, but I think it's this. So he goes. So what I'm doing there is I'm just doing a little trill up to the top note, and as I do that trill, pull that down. So, and it just gives a little it in there. I'm not sure that's exactly what he's doing. Maybe have this a little bit higher as you're playing these notes here. So it's all about tweaking things as you're playing. So while you're playing this high note, you're bringing the portamento down, maybe opening that up a little. And then, so loads of little tweaking happening. And then we've got the big run, and I've copied his first few notes. Does something like that. And he speeds up into his big riff. I don't know exactly what he plays in that riff. I haven't got the skills to listen to every single note that's going at the speed of light. So I've just made one of myself, really. So I'm using these notes. Okay, so again, semitone down if you want to be exact to the track, but yeah, it's more guitar-y than jazzy, that, isn't it? And I'll play that a little bit slower in case you want to copy it. So that's the copy bit, I think, and then we move on to this. And all the while, tweaking with this to give that sort of guitar-y feedback effect. A little bit sloppy there, but you get the idea. But we hold on to this note. Again, just modulating through frequencies on oscillator 2. And then we're going to go to the low bit again with the mad sing. So we wait for the chord change. And this time we go down an octave as well. Flick this up, we're going back to the big portamento slide. And we hold this one on for the whole chord. I think it's 4 bars, is it? And just bringing the modulation in and out to give it some movement. Actually sounds like he might be pressing a note on every 4 beats. I'm not quite sure, but hold it on. Make sure the portamento's down. Not all the way this time. I really like bringing that LFO and the modulation with this. I know it's a really simple thing, but while I've been learning this and playing around with it, it really does feel like you're playing a cello or something. Anyway, we move to the more electronic-y sounds after being to the top bit. And that little bit there is the same as it is at the very start. Then we hold this note on again. Without the drums, it's really hard to get the rhythms right, actually. But they're the right notes and they're the right techniques. And we're nearly at the very end now. After this little final flourish, we just repeat that and then we drop down the frequency. We're just trying to sort of drop it down a little bit now. And at the very end, we have this little riff. Play that twice and then just... And that's it. Put it all together, add a little bit of delay and reverb, and this is what it sounds like. And I can imagine anyone being in an audience in 1979 listening to that for the first time will be absolutely blown away. There's so many things going on. It encompasses so many techniques and styles and textures that it's a proper tour de force. And I can see why people think it's the best synth solo ever recorded. Maybe you've got different ideas. Do let me know in the comments. And I'll put my MIDI files on Patreon if you want to have a play with it yourself. If you're interested, I've used the Cherry Audio plugins for the CR78 and the Polymode, plus I've used IK Multimedia's Modo bass and some simple guitar samples just to finish it off. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, please subscribe, ring the bell, join me over on Patreon. Patrons get access to things like this. They get patches, they get samples, tutorials and other little goodies as well, all for the price of a dodgy coffee month. So ditch the dodgy coffee and get some sonic refreshments. Also, do take a look at my starskycar.com website. Again, there's patches, there's samples, there's things to buy, there's free stuff, but it's nice if you pick up some of the cheaper little bits and bobs. It all really does help to support the channel. Anyway, thanks for staying to the very, very end, and I will see you next time.